The town that was never seen again. The Silent Settlement. In the deep, tangled forests of the American Midwest, nestled between towering pines and the rolling hills, there was once a town that no one ever spoke of. Its name was hidden from the records of time, lost in the very air that hung over it like a veil of mist. This town, as the old ones say, was never seen again. But long before it vanished, it was a place where families lived, and the land seemed to give them everything they needed. The people were hard-working, simple folk who believed in the rhythms of the seasons and the whispers of the wind. But there was something unsettling about that town, something that even the bravest souls in the neighboring villages felt. The land around it felt too quiet, like a secret it kept from the rest of the world. The wind would howl through the trees, but it never seemed to stir the leaves. Birds never sang, and the silence, once thought to be peaceful, felt wrong. Yet the people of the town did not speak of it, for they believed that if they spoke too much of the land's quietude, they would awaken something old, something dark. It was only in the late fall, when the leaves turned gold and the first frost kissed the ground, that a strange event began to unfold. The settlers had known for generations that as the harvest grew thick and the air began to chill, strange things started to happen in the woods. Shadows moved unnaturally, animals vanished, and there was a deep sense that they were not alone. But no one, not even the oldest of the elders, could explain what it was. The town itself was built on the edge of a great forest, a place the locals called the Devil's Grove, for the old-timers swore they had seen strange, ghostly lights flickering between the trees at night. Sometimes travelers would wander in, drawn by a mysterious pull, but they would never be seen again, their footsteps lost to time. One autumn evening, a young woman named Clara, a newcomer to the town, stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the shadowy woods. She had only recently arrived to marry a man named Amos, a quiet farmer with an air of mystery about him. Her excitement had faded with each passing day as strange things began to occur. Amos had told her not to worry, that the town was a peaceful place and that the whispers of the woods were simply part of its charm. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive in a way that nothing in nature should be. One night, Clara decided to explore the edge of the woods. It was a cool, crisp evening, and the sun had long since dipped behind the hills. The town was quiet, the last ember of the bonfires from the harvest festival still smoldering in the distance. She walked slowly, careful to avoid the dried twigs that crunched underfoot. As she ventured further, the wind picked up, a low growl that made the trees sway as if they were whispering to each other. Clara paused, listening, but the wind didn't sound natural. It carried with it an almost mournful, otherworldly quality. She took another step. And another. Then in the distance she saw a flicker of light, a candle, perhaps, or a lantern, glowing faintly between the trees. She moved closer, drawn to the soft glow. The light was too steady to be the light of an animal's eyes or the reflection of the moon. Clara's heart quickened. As she stepped into the clearing where the light emanated from, the air grew colder. A chill that nipped at her skin and made her breath hang in the air like fog. The ground underfoot felt unnervingly soft, like the earth was swallowing her steps. The flickering light grew brighter, more defined, and it wasn't a lantern at all. It was a figure, a tall, slender figure, draped in a cloak of deep, dark blue. Its face was obscured by a hood, and its presence seemed to draw all the warmth from the air, leaving a cold emptiness in its place. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move, but Clara felt its eyes on her, though she couldn't see them. The figure seemed to loom over her, as though it had been there for centuries, watching, waiting. She knew then that this was no ordinary person, no traveler lost in the woods. This was something ancient. The wind howled around her, the trees creaked in protest, and the shadowy figure began to speak. Its voice was like the wind itself, soft but carrying a weight of something that made Clara shudder. "Leave," the figure whispered, its voice like an old oak's creaking in the breeze. "Leave this town, child. For you are not meant to be here. You are trespassing on ground that was never meant to be walked upon." Clara's legs trembled beneath her, and her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to flee, to turn and run back to the safety of her home, but her body refused to move. The figure's words were like chains, binding her to the spot. "I've come to marry Amos," Clara managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't mean any harm." The figure tilted its head, and for the briefest moment, Clara thought she saw a flash of something behind the hood, a glowing ember perhaps, or the faintest glint of eyes. But then the darkness swallowed it whole, leaving her with a cold sense of foreboding. "Heed my warning, child," the figure whispered. "The town that you now call home was built upon land that was never meant to be settled. The price of living here is far too high. And those who fail to heed the signs, disappear. The last word hung in the air like a weight. Disappear. Clara's mind raced. The townsfolk had spoken of those who had vanished over the years. Strangers who had come and gone, never seen again. She had thought it to be the work of nature or misfortune. But now, standing in the shadow of this figure, Clara realized that something darker was at play. The figure took a step forward and Clara took an instinctive step back. The town that was never seen again, it said. Those who stay too long become one with the land. The earth does not forget. With that, the figure vanished into the air as if it had never been there at all. Clara stood frozen in place, her mind racing. The wind howled through the trees, louder than ever, and for the first time, Clara realized what the elders had meant all along. The town was cursed, and she had wandered too far into its grasp. Her heart thundered in her chest as she turned, bolting back toward the town, every step heavier than the last. The mist had started to rise, swirling around her feet like a living thing. Behind her, the eerie howls of the wind seemed to chase her, grow louder with each passing moment. By the time she reached her home, the town was completely silent. No lights flickered in the windows, no voices called out in the dark. It was as if the town itself had held its breath, waiting to see if she would return. Clara slammed the door shut behind her, her body trembling with fear. She leaned against the wall, trying to calm herself, but the events of the night had shaken her to her core. Amos, her new husband, was nowhere to be found. That night, Clara would discover that she was not the first to have heard the whispers of the land. The town and the people in it had been lost long before she had set foot in it. The town that was never seen again was not just a place, it was a warning. A warning of a land cursed, where time bent and twisted, and those who dared to live within it never left. But who would believe her? And who would listen? The shadows of the town stretched longer that night, and the cold wind continued to whisper. The vanishing. The days that followed Clara's encounter with the figure in the woods were strange, unsettling. The town, which once hummed with quiet activity, seemed even quieter now. The usual sounds, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the chirping of birds, the soft murmur of conversation, had all but disappeared. Instead, there was a thick, oppressive silence that wrapped around the town like a heavy blanket. No one spoke of what Clara had seen or what she had heard, as if the very mention of the strange figure would summon it back. But Clara could not shake the sense of unease that had settled in her chest, and the fear in her heart grew with each passing day. Amos had not come home that night. She had waited up for him, pacing anxiously, staring out the window into the empty streets, but he never appeared. It was not like him to disappear without a word, and Clara's worry turned to panic as the hours ticked by. She had called out for him, walked through the house calling his name, but there was no answer. As the days turned into weeks, Clara's concern deepened. She had searched the town, speaking to the neighbors, asking if they had seen Amos, but no one had. They all gave her the same look, the same strange, faraway look, as if they knew something she did not. The townsfolk avoided her, their eyes drifting away when she approached, and there was an eerie sense that they were all hiding something. Clara's thoughts often drifted back to the encounter in the woods. The figure had warned her. The town that was never seen again. Those who stayed too long became one with the land. It was as if Amos had vanished into thin air, swallowed up by the cursed earth, and Clara, now feeling the grip of the town tighten around her, began to realize that she might be next. One afternoon, after days of fruitless searching, Clara took to wandering the town once more. She passed the houses of her neighbors, but the windows were dark, their doors shut tight. There was no sign of life. Not even the dogs barked anymore. Clara felt as though she was walking through a ghost town, one where the people had simply disappeared. It was then that she noticed the strange markings on the doorposts of some of the houses, small, crude symbols etched into the wood, half hidden by the growing moss. She stopped and stared at one of the symbols, the sick feeling in her stomach growing stronger. She had seen those marks before. The elders had warned her of them. They were ancient runes, symbols of protection, yes, but also of warding. They marked places where something was buried, something sealed away. A town that had been trapped in time, locked in a cycle of disappearance. The more Clara thought about it, the more she realized that these were not just symbols of protection, but of binding. The townspeople had known something they had kept hidden from the newcomers. They were not just marks, they were warnings. In her desperation, Clara sought out the town's oldest resident, old Maudie, who lived alone on the outskirts of town. Maudie was a recluse, known for her eccentricities and her strange stories about the land. She had lived in the town longer than anyone else and was rumored to know the town's dark history. Many said she was the last one left from the original settlers, and though the town was old, Maudie's mind remained sharp. When Clara arrived at Maudie's house, she was greeted by a faint smell of dried herbs and the sound of low, whispered chants coming from inside. The door creaked open and Clara stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Maudie sat in her rocking chair by the fire, her face a mass of wrinkles, her eyes clouded with age but sharp with knowledge. Maudie looked up at Clara and without a word, she motioned for her to sit. There was an unsettling calm about her, as though she had been expecting Clara's visit. "I know what you've seen," Maudie said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years. "The town, the land, it calls to those who listen. And it takes what it needs." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Where is Amos?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What is happening to this town?" Maudie's lips tightened into a thin line. "The land, child, is old. Older than any of us. It was never meant to be settled. The spirits that dwell there, benevolent at first but twisted now with time, they have claimed the land as their own. And those who remain too long, those who disturb its peace, they vanish as if they were never there." Clara leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "But Amos? He's gone. Like the others." Maudie nodded slowly. "Yes, like the others. And you, Clara, are not exempt. The land has already started to take its toll on you." Clara recoiled, her pulse racing. "What can I do? How can I stop it?" Maudie's eyes seemed to pierce through Clara as she spoke. "There is no stopping it. Not once it begins. The land takes what it wants when it wants. It has been doing this for generations. The ones who stay too long, they fade. They become part of the earth, their bodies consumed by the very land they built on. They are forgotten." Clara's mind swirled with terror. "And the town? What will happen to it?" Maudie's voice dropped to a whisper. "It will disappear. Just as it always has. The town that was never seen again. One day you will wake and it will be as if it was never there. The land will reclaim it. It always does." Clara stood up, her legs weak beneath her. "Then what do I do? What happens to me?" Maudie's expression softened. "There is no escape, child. Not now. Not after what you've seen. You've already heard the whispers. The land has already marked you. All you can do is wait. Wait for the end." Clara's heart sank, and as she turned to leave, the weight of Maudie's words followed her like a shadow. The town was doomed. There was no escape from the land that had claimed it. And Amos was gone. As Clara walked back to her home, the wind began to pick up again, louder than before. The sky darkened, and the first signs of the long-anticipated storm began to stir in the distance. It was as if the very air around her was alive, buzzing with anticipation. But she didn't stop. She had no place left to go. When Clara returned to her home, everything was quiet, too quiet. There were no signs of life. No familiar sounds of movement. The air felt stagnant, as if it were holding its breath. But even in the oppressive silence, Clara could feel the change. The town was slipping away and soon it would be gone, just like all the others before it. And she too would vanish, becoming one with the land. But before the town could disappear entirely, Clara had one final, terrifying realization. She could hear something in the distance. Voices. But they were not from the town. They were from the forest. And they were calling her name. The town that vanished. The night Clara first heard her name being called by those unseen voices, a deep dread settled over her like a heavy fog. She had returned home from Maudie's house, feeling a strange mix of hopelessness and terror. The voices, distant yet so clear, seemed to grow louder, swirling through the air like the rustling of dry leaves. She couldn't make out the words. They weren't her name alone, but something more. A chant, a beckoning that seemed to call her deeper into the woods. Clara stood frozen at the door of her home, her hand gripping the wooden frame. The air around her felt unnaturally cold, and the wind, which had been relentless in its howl, now carried a note of urgency. She could no longer ignore the eerie sensation that the land had become more than just a place. It had become an entity. The town, the people, the forest, they were all intertwined in some unholy bond. The wind howled again, and Clara shuddered, feeling the presence of something ancient and dark on the periphery of her senses. It was as if the earth itself was waiting for her, pulling her toward the place where Amos had vanished. Against her better judgment, she stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at her skin. Her footsteps crunched on the frost-covered ground as she walked toward the forest, drawn by the voices that echoed in her ears. Each step seemed to take her further away from her former life, each footfall pulling her deeper into the silence of the woods. The trees loomed like twisted sentinels, their branches reaching out like bony fingers, blocking the path with their heavy shadows. She didn't know how long she had been walking, minutes, hours? Time seemed to warp here in this cursed place. But Clara was no longer concerned with time. She was consumed with an overwhelming sense of inevitability. As she ventured deeper, the air thickened, and the distant glow of lights, flickering ghostly like lanterns, appeared between the trees. Her heart raced. This was the same place she had encountered the figure in the cloak. The figure that had warned her. And now, it seemed, it was her turn to face whatever fate awaited her. The voices grew clearer. They were now unmistakable, calling her name, urging her to come closer, to enter the heart of the woods. Clara's mind swirled with confusion and terror. She wanted to run, to flee back to her home, but she couldn't. Her legs moved of their own accord, carried by some unseen force. She reached the clearing where the mysterious lights flickered, the same place where the figure had stood. But now there was no figure, only the lights, dancing in the air like will-o'-the-wisps, glowing softly against the darkness. Clara could feel the presence of something else, something watching her, waiting. And then she saw it. At the far end of the clearing, an ancient stone arch stood, half hidden by vines and moss. The arch was intricately carved with strange symbols, symbols she had never seen before. The stones were worn and weathered, yet they exuded an undeniable power. It was as if the arch had been here forever, a gateway to something far beyond her understanding. Clara hesitated at the edge of the clearing, fear washing over her like a cold wave. The voices, now so close they seemed to come from the very earth beneath her feet, urged her forward. Come, Clara. Join us. You have always belonged to the land. A sharp gasp escaped Clara's lips. It was as if the earth itself knew her, as if the land had always been waiting for her to step forward, to take her place among the forgotten. Without realizing it, Clara found herself stepping closer to the arch. Her feet were no longer her own. They moved without her will, carrying her toward the stone structure. The air around her seemed to hum with ancient energy, and the symbols carved into the stone glowed faintly as if alive. And then she heard it, the sound of footsteps behind her. She spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. There, emerging from the darkness, was Amos. Her breath caught in her throat. He was different. His eyes were dark, hollow, and his skin had a pale, sickly tint. He looked as if he were no longer entirely human. His mouth curled into a strange, twisted smile. Clara, he whispered, his voice cold and empty. It's time. Time to join us. Clara staggered back, her mind racing. Amos? What happened to you? Where have you been? Amos's smile faded into a cold, detached expression. I've always been here, Clara. In the woods. In the land. The town was never meant to exist. The land demanded it. And now it has claimed us all. Clara's heart clenched as she realized the truth. The town, the people, the land, the woods, were all connected in some dark, twisted pact. The town was built upon something ancient, something hungry. And now it was taking its toll on everyone who had dared to live there. Amos stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. You knew, didn't you? From the beginning. The town that was never seen again. The ones who stay too long become part of the earth. And now it's your turn. Clara felt her knees weaken, the weight of his words crashing down on her like a wave. She wanted to scream, to fight, but there was no escape. She could feel the earth beneath her feet shifting, the ground trembling with a strange energy. It was as if the town itself was pulling her down, as if the land was reaching out to claim her. Amos, Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Please, don't do this. But Amos was no longer the man she had married. He was something else, something bound to the land, something that had long since lost its humanity. And as he reached for her, Clara knew there was no escaping the fate of the town. No escaping the curse that had claimed so many before her. The earth beneath her feet cracked open, a deep chasm forming between her and the arch. The winds howled, the trees shook, and the voices of the lost whispered all around her, their cold breath brushing her skin. The ground seemed to pull at her as if it wanted to swallow her whole. And then, in a single shattering moment, Clara was pulled into the earth. The town was gone. The people were gone. The land had taken them all just as it always did. In the morning, the town was silent. The wind no longer whispered. The birds did not sing. And the streets were empty. The houses stood abandoned, their doors ajar, their windows dark. And so it was, as the legend goes, that the town that was never seen again became a part of the earth itself, a place lost to time, swallowed by the land. No one would speak of it again. No one would remember the vanished town, for it was never meant to be remembered. The land, hungry for what it had taken, had erased it all from memory. And those who dared to listen, those who ventured too far, became part of the earth, too. The town that was never seen again remained a warning to those who passed through the land. Some places are not meant to be discovered. Some histories are not meant to be uncovered. And some secrets are buried too deep for anyone to find. And so, the land waited, its hunger never sated, waiting for the next soul to wander too close.